Have you heard of Keylontic science at all?
No, no.
I think you would enjoy it. So, I mean, I'm genuinely a very tactile person, like a very kinesthetic person. So I have a lot of things when it's like, for a very long time, I felt very frustrated that I just cannot see things. I can see things. So I've had experiences like, I genuinely thought that those are, within the cultural narrative that we have, you would say that those experiences are daydreaming experiences. Now, I had just full on experience when my body is completely still. I'm not lying in bed. I'm up and about, but I am literally surrounded by, so it's instead of me traveling to a place, it's like a place comes to me and I'm in a different dimension physically and my body doesn't move at all. And I'm interacting with different beings and it has nothing to do with channeling.
Wow.
But it has ever taken over my biofield. It just has been me, but I am surrounded by completely different fields of reality. But it's not something that I see with my physical eyes. It's something that I can feel on a very tactile level. And my understanding of the world is very geometrical. So like when I see shapes, when I see ratios, for me, numbers are like, I just don't care. But when I see ratios, when I see movement, when I see mechanics, I look at two-dimensional images and I feel multidimensional planes, angles moving instead of just looking at something static. So for me, like colors, ratios, they translate in a complete different way. Like my body is ridiculously sensitive to sound frequencies, resonance. And like 90% of the music out there literally translates for my body as noise, like roadworks, like just something pounding in my head. And Keylontic, well, it was like I had this 20-something year experience of just not knowing what to do with myself. And then along came Keylontic science and it started explaining the math. It started explaining the physics. It started explaining creation mechanics from a subatomic scale to a galactic scale with such precision, such consistency, such beautiful harmony. And it explained the differences between 98% of mainstream spirituality, religion, science, all sorts of storytelling tools that are very prominent in the media right now, versus eternal life, perpetual movement, creation mechanics. I flipped through your book, but I'm like, I'm very bad with reading nowadays because my eyes just start burning. So explain the math, because I love that you're using math in there. Because I think we're intuitively talking about the same thing. I would love to learn the scientific language. Like my jobs have always been something around diplomacy. I was translating between vocabularies. So I'm very interested. Like I've never been into any religion, but I've educated myself in religious language. Not in all of them, some of them, to a jack of all trades level. I've educated myself in languages of science, all sorts of secular ways of self-development and what's out there, what about the psyche, neuroscience. I'm very interested in it. So I have a very well spread out vocabulary to be able to say, hey, we are all talking about the same thing, just with different variations. So where is the common element in there?
Yes, so that's definitely true. And what I like to think about in this case is that you have your circle, I have my circle, right? And in each circle is our language and our experiences. The goal here then is to take one circle and draw arrows to the other circle and vice versa, because there could indeed be similar experiences. In the language, every mind speaks a slightly different language. Like, even though we might think in English and we might speak in English, it literally doesn't mean we're thinking the same thing. And so the trick then is to map. It's called mapping. We need to map our language to each other. Okay. And so the way I like to start explaining my book is the idea that the world we see in front of us could be considered the material world. You know, like a rock is material, it's solid. The clothes are physical form. Those things are all tangible. And something about them that's unique is that you can always measure some distance, like it's 2 inches long or 50 inches wide, just any kind of dimension out. You can literally just point to it and say that that's how much distance it displaces in the material world. So that's one thing that in the material world we can do with everything, is you can measure it. Now, there's something peculiar, and that's that what we're looking at right now isn't actually the material world. It's a 2-dimensional representation of possibly 3-dimensional material world. So, and why I say possibly 3D material world is the only evidence we have for it is with respect to us, an observer. We don't actually know it's 3D because we're only looking at a 2-dimensional picture of a possibly 3D world. And like a great artist, you know that you can, with the right shadowing and lighting, create the illusion of a 3rd dimension. So a very important thing to distinguish here is that there's the material world, and then there's the perception of the material world. And then there's one other element here. So if you imagine a diagram, on the far left, you have the material world. It might be like a ball, let's say, 3 dimensions. And then you have a 2-dimensional representation of it. And then you have the thing that is observing that 2-dimensional representation. So people might spend their entire lives thinking that they're looking at the ball, but really they're looking at this. And then take it a step further, and then they tend to think that they are this thing, but they're really just observing that thing. And whatever is here is the things we observe, like the image of the world, what we think, what we feel, it all happens here. The observer is just literally just looking at it. That's what it does. And so with modern science, we run into a problem here, because this thing and this thing, the observer and the thing that's observed, are not the material world. And so if we assume the entire existence is material, we're forgetting about this guy and we're forgetting about that guy. So claiming that the universe is purely physical or material is, in front of your eyes, self-evidently false. Like in front of our metaphoric eye, right? The eye as singular, we're getting information from 2 eyes. It's just an illusion. It's not actually the 3D world. We're literally just looking at a representation of it. So what this tells me is that we have something that's not material. I call it an immaterial surface. So the complementary idea to a material object is an immaterial one. And what's unique about immaterial things is that whereas in the physical world, you can measure it, like you could take a ruler and say it's X inches long or anything. It makes no sense anymore to do it with this thing. It really doesn't make sense, because how would I measure the thing I'm observing? It makes no sense. So it just is. There's a property of isness to it. It's just a happening. It's there. And scale is really arbitrary. So we get into the concept that the observer is scale invariant. It doesn't matter if I'm out in Pluto, on Earth, the Andromeda Galaxy, it doesn't matter. The amount of information is still going to be put onto this guy. So it doesn't matter what's happening out here, it's always being put on here. And then eventually being perceived by something out here. So what my book attempts to do then is attempts to explain how and what's happening here and here. I'm not interested in what's happening out here because that's the job for scientists. What I'm making a plea for, though, is for these guys to start coming here and here. But they pretend like the observer is material, like there is no soul, there's none of that. And to me, it's just ignorance. And it's becoming dogmatic even to where if I propose some of these ideas, they don't even understand the idea. And so in arguments about this, they wouldn't even argue against the idea. They would argue against a misrepresentation of the idea, which tells me that it's just too far out there for people that think in this world, in the concrete world. So we are some ways away from people making the jump from here to here. How long that's going to take, I don't know. But at least with this book, I can give it to people. And maybe someone else has a key, a way of relaying the idea in a way that turns on the light bulb in somebody else. It's just puzzle pieces is how I see it. So that's what the book's about. It's about talking about here and here. And the math is just symbolic. It doesn't even obey the normal math standards. I just put it there because I saw relationship in mathematics. I wanted to put the relationship down on paper. It'll be up to a mathematician who truly understands math to go through and map out the correct equations. So, yeah, the difference is, I think in a more simpler term, is this is physical, this is non-physical. And so this book's about the non-physical side of life. And so that's the language I use to describe it.